Welcome to the Dan Sports Tips NFL Week 3 Daily Fantasy Show. I will be taking a look at everything we need for our daily fantasy games on DraftKings this week in the NFL. I will be looking at offensive stacks, defensive stacks, and then other players that can be used at quarterback, running back, tight end and wide receiver, and defense and special teams. I'm going to start, as I say, with the stacks of the day, but for anyone that hasn't had the opportunity to sign up and play daily fantasy sports with DraftKings yet, I will put a link in the description beneath this video that will enable you to do so today and join in on the fun. Green Bay Packers, Aaron Rodgers for 7,700 and wide receiver Jordy Nelson for 7,400. The narrative all week has been what's wrong with Aaron Rodgers, what's wrong with the Packers offense, which may actually make him a contrarian play a little bit this week against the Detroit Lions, especially against the defense that's got serious injury doubts over Ziggy Ansah and DeAndre Levy. That will leave them either without their best pass rusher and or coverage player in the middle of the field, or have them seriously hobbled in the game, adding a lot of upside to the play from Rodgers' perspective. You have to believe Jordy Nelson will improve the more time between him and the injury, and the more time he spends on the field, the better the timing for him and Rodgers will come back as well for this duo that has been so prolific, especially if Rodgers is afforded time to find the receivers downfield. For those of you that want to take a risk, you can maybe go with quarterback Aaron Rodgers for 7,700 and tight end Jared Cook for 2,900. It's a much cheaper stack. As we know, the Lions allowed the most tight end touchdowns last season. They've continued that this year, allowing 4 by my count through 2 games. And if Levy is out, it could be open season across the middle, as he is their best linebacker. It should be noted that all 3 starters at the linebacker position left last week's game with injuries against Tennessee. Cook is not exactly a picture of consistency. He is the main receiving threat at the position ahead of Richard Rodgers. Richard Rodgers is obviously the man who caught that Hail Mary pass against Detroit. Among his 8 receptions from his 8 targets for 146 yards with a touchdown the last time these teams met last season. So obviously, as we can see, the tight end did have a very productive day that day. Moving on to the San Diego Chargers, quarterback Philip Rivers for 6,700 and wide receiver Travis Benjamin for 5,200. I find it hard to gauge how popular this stack's going to be this week. Certainly in Sunday-only slates, with the absence of the Saints' defence to pick on, the Colts, on what we have seen, are one of the top 2 available options to oppose. They're down their best quarterback, Vontae Davis, at the back end. They're not good against run or pass. The game could develop in something of a shootout. Benjamin is perfectly capable of supplying a deep threat over the top with his speed, as evidenced last week when his depth of target went up drastically after Keenan Allen went down with the injury in week 1. With Danny Woodhead out for the year and Antonio Gates quite possibly missing this game too, the targets have got to go somewhere, and as the number 1 off of a big week, Benjamin looks a really good complement to Rivers, though I couldn't put you off playing quarterback Philip Rivers for 6,700 and wide receiver Terrell Williams for 4,300. I'm certain this will be a less used duo. It's almost $1,000 cheaper. Williams has had 11 targets through the first 2 games, not a massive disparity to the 14 of Benjamin, and Woodhead's absence particularly means the ball will likely be thrown downfield more. Williams can also offer the deep threat, as his 44-yard touchdown pass to save his week last week and get him to 15 points did show. Both San Diego receivers look to have a relatively high floor in this matchup, and I think you certainly want some charges against the Colts. The Jacksonville Jaguars, quarterback Blake Bortles for 6,500 and wide receiver Allen Robinson for 7,500. This, I think, will be very underused after the performance, particularly of Robinson through the first couple of weeks of the season, has been disappointing, shall we say. The Jags absolutely have to have this game after the atrocity in San Diego last week and the narrow defeat to the Packers in week 1. Bortles has started the season poorly. This is not a good Ravens team. It looks particularly suspect in the secondary. As I say, people may be frightened off after last week, and even potentially by the 2-0 Ravens, who are about as poor a 2-0 team as I can recall. I mean, if narrow wins over the Bills and Browns are good, then maybe they are good. But if they were a good team, they'd be blowing those teams out, in my opinion. I think the Jags will have to throw more, as Yeldon hasn't looked up to the job, and Ivory, though he may be back, I can't see him being at full strength to go. Robinson is definitely the go-to guy in this offense. Even if they do lose at home here, we know that Bortles has been the king of junk time for over a year now, scoring lots of points late on in comeback bids. The Tennessee Titans, this one comes with an asterisk. Quarterback Marcus Mariota for 5,900 and tight end Delaney Walker for $5,000. I'm not actually sure that Walker's going to play, but if he is active, then this is worth a stack. We did use this stack with marginal success and we'll go last week, and we will go back in again this week. The Titans have stated their desire to run the football, but should have opportunities to throw the ball against a dreadful thus far Raiders unit that has allowed an average of over 400 yards passing through games against Atlanta and New Orleans, and were one of the least effective against the tight end last year. So I'm going to look for Mariota and Walker, if he plays, to hook up again this week. Moving on to defensive stacks, running back D'Angelo Williams for 7,500 and Pittsburgh Steelers defence and special teams for 2,900. I think you can run on the wide 9 front, favoured by Jim Swartz, the Eagles defensive coordinator, and through 2 games Williams has been a beast in for the suspended Le'Veon Bell, which he obviously has this one more week before Bell comes back. He's averaged 118 yards over the first 2 games. It is no fluke, as evidenced by his performance when Bell was out through injury and suspension last year. The Steelers will likely play Wentz the same way they played Kirk Cousins in week 1, dropping into coverage, rushing just 4 and giving him enough rope to hang himself. I see turnovers for the defence. I can certainly possibly more than one as well. I think this is the wake-up call for the current Rookie of the Year leader Carson Wentz, because the Steelers are by far and away the best team he's faced, having faced the Browns and the Bears. Running back Charles Sims for 4,900 and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defence and special teams for 3,100. Charles Sims, usually isolated to the third down running back role, will take over as feature back with the injury to Doug Martin, a position he has earned the first crack at according to head coach Dirk Cutter, a role he has occupied in the past when Martin's been hurt. It remains to be seen how he will get on against a fairly stout Rams front 7, but with points per reception as well, he does look worthy of a stack alongside a defence that looks built to beat the Rams. The Rams haven't scored a touchdown yet this season, and the Bucs defence is designed to stop the run and make you pass. With Gurley being the Rams' strength on offence, that will place the ball in the hands of Case Keenum, who starts again. It looks a very, very good spot for the Bucs defensive unit at home in this game, and I think they can probably notch at least a couple of turnovers off of Case Keenum as well. Looking at the quarterbacks this week, I think Kirk Cousins of Washington for 6,400. Despite the fact he hasn't performed well this year, it is fair to say in comparison to the stretch at the back end of last year, the turnovers have begun to creep back in. I do think he's worth a look this week with a slight caveat. He was one of the league's worst quarterbacks when facing the blitz last year, and the Giants don't blitz much. As we know, Spagnuolo likes to rush 4 and drop the rest into coverage. That's what the Steelers did to Cousins in week 1 with good effect. He didn't play well then either, but this is still a team that cannot run the football, and if you want the bonus points for the 300 yards game, Cousins doesn't seem a bad bet to hit that level. If he can minimise the turnovers, I think he could have a very good game. And again, he's another one that I think will be underused this week. Running backs, Ezekiel Elliott of Dallas for 6,900. The Chicago Bears last year were the worst defence against the run in the NFL. They acquired Danny Trevathan and Jarrell Freeman to fix that issue as best they could at the linebacker position. Early results were positive. However, now the Bears defence has been decimated by injury in the Monday night game with Philadelphia, particularly in the front 7. Nose tackle Goldman, Trevathan at linebacker. They're both going to miss this game, as well as top pass rusher Lamar Houston. The horror days of last year's rush defence will particularly look like they may well come back with Goldman and Trevathan out. And against this Dallas offensive line, Elliott could well have that breakout game here, just as I think people might jump off of the bandwagon. Melvin Gordon of San Diego for 5,800. The injury to Danny Woodhead, the darling of us that play daily fantasy with point per reception, clears the lane for Gordon for the rest of the year. Dexter McCluster has come in. He is a solid receiving threat out of the backfield, but he's not going to challenge the main running back. I still think Gordon will get some looks in the passing game as well. The Chargers are going to fully hitch their cart to the workhorse Gordon now. The Colts defence is an ideal opponent as well. Gordon has suddenly discovered the end zone in the NFL this year, having failed to score a touchdown his entire rookie season. And in what looks to be a shootout, I think Gordon could have a good game this week. And running back Cameron Artis-Payne of the Carolina Panthers is in at $3,000 this week. I think it's a risky play, but at the price it's probably worth a look. The Panthers have lost starter Jonathan Stewart. They will run a committee with Artis-Payne and Fozzie Whitaker involved. However, Artis-Payne has been named the starter. He performed well, averaging around 5 yards per carry in a 3-game stretch at the back end of last season when Stewart was missing. He received the lion's share of the workload over Whitaker then, and it would be no shock if that was to continue now. The 49ers front 7 has been sneaky good this year though, and profiles well to stop the run. So you are buying a bit of a lottery ticket with Artis-Payne, but you aren't going to need an awful lot at the price tag for it to provide value, and then you can obviously pay up for your other skill position players, like wide receiver Des Bryant for 8,400 of the Dallas Cowboys. There are few Cowboys who can be considered unusable this week against the Bears unit that will be absent key components. The pass rush and linebackers have been affected, as I said. That could expose the weakest unit coming into the year at the back end of the defence, which may also still be absent Kyle Fuller, first round pick of a couple of years ago. Dallas should be able to move the football with the absence of Lamar Houston, Danny Trevathan, Eddie Goldman, Pernell McPhee, and as I say, potentially Kyle Fuller. All of those are starters. A return to the worst rush defence in the league looks possible. Willie Young, Jarrell Freeman and Tracy Porter can't do it all themselves. Porter may well stick with Bryant in this game, but he is not good enough to cover a top-level receiver like Dez, and Dak Prescott should have time to get the ball to him as well, with the Bears' best pass rusher being down for this game. I think Bryant looks a fairly solid play. Jarvis Landry of Miami for 6,600. Landry is a beast in the PPR format. He's Ryan Tannehill's favourite target. He gets double-digit looks every week. He will be a popular play against the Cleveland Browns, but it's a play that makes an awful lot of sense, as well as double-digit receptions and the 100-yard mark are all very, very feasibly achievable here. Landry should go over 20 points, in my opinion, this week. Sterling Shepard of the New York Giants for 5,500. This could certainly develop into something of a shootout with a Washington team that cannot run the ball, and Rashad Jennings banged up for the G-men. If it does, with Josh Norman potentially covering Odell Beckham and shadowing him round the field, there are strong chances that Shepard, who has been pretty good through 2 games, catching all 8 targets and clearing 100 yards last week, will see an uptick in his work, and I think Shepard looks a very good potential performer this week. Philip Dorsett of Indianapolis for 4,400. Dante Moncrief will be out for the Indianapolis Colts. Dorsett therefore should see an increased role in this offense from the level of around 5 or 6 targets that he sat at in the first 2 games. In a game that does profile as a shootout with the Chargers, there could be plenty of points on offer. I'm hoping he doesn't end up lined up against Verrett, of course, but he's certainly worth a play at 4,400 because there's a lot of upside here. And Jamison Crowder of the Washington Redskins for 3,800. He's been a target monster in the slot for the pass-happy Washington Redskins, averaging 9 targets a game. The slot, the middle of the field, is the weak area of the Giants' pass defence as well. That should therefore continue this week for a receiver that plays on a team that cannot run the football effectively. He's managed double-digit points in each of the first 2 games this year. If you are playing a Sunday-Monday slate, I'd certainly be looking at Mohamed Sanu for the Falcons and Willie Snead for the Saints on Monday night. They both look rock-solid selections. Moving on to tight end, Jordan Reed of the Washington Redskins for 6,500. If ever you're going to pay up at tight end, this is quite possibly the spot. As I discussed with Jamison Crowder, the Giants do struggle to cover the middle of the field. And they certainly don't have a player who can match up one-on-one with Reed in pass protection, in pass defence. A pass-happy team with a big target who is a main red zone threat, this is the week you pay the money for Reed. Dennis Pitter of Baltimore for 3,400 is finally back on the field, playing alongside his best friend, quarterback Joe Flacco. He's back with a bang. He caught 9 of his 12 targets for 102 yards against the Cleveland Browns last week. Flacco seems sure to keep feeding him the ball. Jacksonville, a defence that has allowed points to this point in the year, as evidenced by the collapse against the Chargers last week. Tight end Hunter Henry, speaking of those Chargers, for 2,500. The rookie looks set to be involved this week with the likely absence of Antonio Gates. The Chargers do like to use the tight end in the passing game. As the game with the Colts looks to have points in it, Henry could have tremendous upside at the minimum price and enable you to spend up for sure things at receiver and running back. Also, speaking of injury, tight end Anthony Fasano of Tennessee for 2,500. Delaney Walker, who I've included in the stack, may not go in this game. Oakland have really struggled to this point against the pass. They've had issues defending the tight end dating back to last year. If Walker doesn't go, Fasano may have a shot at upside at the minimum price at tight end as well. Moving on to defence and special teams, there are a couple of defensive units that I like the look of a little bit this week. The Miami Dolphins for 3,000 will be very popular against the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, Cleveland will be starting rookie Cody Kessler, who I think general consensus, and I agree with, is not ready to be playing in the NFL. They're down wide receiver Corey Coleman, who's been their best player so far this season. If you're going to be relying on the run game, then the front 7 in Miami does look fairly solid as well. And I think all round Miami look to have certainly chances at potential a couple of turnovers off of Kessler. And the other one is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, as I said earlier on, for 3,100. The funnel defence is focusing on stopping the run. Todd Gurley will give them a challenge in doing so. I think if LA are to have any chance in this game, they've got to try and put the ball into the hands of Case Keenum, which is normally a recipe for disaster. The Buccaneers cornerbacks do have potential. There's certainly potential for some picks here as well. That's what I've got for you this week. Let me know in the comments what you think is going to happen in the NFL this week, who you'll be using in your lineups. Don't forget to hit that like button. Please subscribe to my channel. I'm here every week through the season. And give me a follow on Twitter at dansports.tips. I'll see you later.